Hello, everybody. Welcome to our week in epistemology, discussing skepticism. Um, for this video, I wanted to change things up just a little bit. Instead of going through PowerPoint, which I'll probably do in some other lectures, I just wanted to sort of go through a classic philosophical piece of writing to kind of talk you through it and help you see some of the philosophical significance. So this is Descartes' famous Meditations. He wrote the Meditations. I mean, it's sort of in a kind of way where he's almost telling a story. It's fun and interesting and really fantastic piece of philosophy from the modern period. Rene Descartes was a famous mathematician, scientist, and philosopher. If anything, you've probably heard of the Cartesian coordinate system that you learned about in geometry class. That's the same Rene Descartes that invented that. He's also most famous in philosophy for basically inventing almost a kind of academic skepticism. And it's interesting, the Meditations start sort of in the first meditation. He introduces this level of skepticism and then attempts to sort of solve the problem of skepticism that he raises in the following 5 meditations. There's 6 total. And it's almost a little funny or comical. There's a lot of philosophical consensus that Descartes did a fantastic job at introducing the problem of skepticism and did an absolutely horrible job in solving the problem of skepticism, partly because he made a circular error in reasoning, and partly because in the end he appeals to the existence of God as if that somehow solves the problem of skepticism. And that just doesn't seem terribly plausible to people. So here we go, though. Let's begin. In the first meditation, basically, Descartes is sort of professes to be what's called an epistemological foundationalist. Now, what's a foundationalist? Well, a foundationalist is a kind of philosopher that believes that knowledge, the things that we know, have some kind of steady foundation. That there are certain kinds of fundamental or foundational truths that we know that we build further knowledge upon. And Descartes is sort of initially looking at his beliefs and coming to recognize that, as he's gotten older, he has realized that many of his previous beliefs that he had as a young man turned out to be false. Turned out to be things that while he believed what he thought was on the basis of good evidence, it turned out that it wasn't good evidence, and it turned out that the beliefs themselves were false. So in order to sort of be certain about anything that he currently believes, Descartes wants to really, reflect heavily on the possibility of whether or not his current beliefs are false. And from that, he wants to kind of attempt to come up with a certain set of foundational beliefs that he thinks he can't actually doubt. He wants to find some foundational beliefs that are solid, more solid than, like as solid as certainty can give you, in order to try to build back up, beliefs in science and the like. Now, Descartes is kind of writing at an interesting time in history when up until the Descartes' time, sort of modern period, the church, basically, the Catholic Church, was the arbiter of most all knowledge. And it's around this modern period that starts to fall into question, right? It starts to fall into question as to whether or not the church actually, knows much of anything about whether or not, the Earth is at the center of the universe, or what, makes up stuff in physics, what, the beginnings of serious physics and chemistry are going on here, and as well as cosmology, and the church just doesn't seem to have any of these answers. So Descartes is writing here, in a certain sense, to try to give science a firm foundation, upon which the rest of science can be built. So he wants to establish this firm foundation, that is his foundationalism. In order to do that, basically he comes to think that he needs to not necessarily prove prove that all of his beliefs are false, but withhold assenting to any of those beliefs that he has that he thinks are not indubitable. And to be indubitable means to be undoubtable, right? So basically, any belief that he thinks it's possible to doubt, what he's going to do, like in reflecting on himself, he's going to set all of those beliefs aside. If he can come up with a way in which he can doubt one of those beliefs, then it's not going to be, he thinks, a good, suitable foundation for all of knowledge, right? For all of like scientific knowledge, right? Or just any knowledge whatsoever. So what he's looking for is solid foundations, things that cannot be doubted in and of themselves, things that are going to really ground all of human knowledge. So here we go. I can start reading some of these. All that up to the present time I have accepted as most true and certain I have learned either from the senses or through the senses. But it is sometimes proved to me that these senses are deceptive, and it is wiser not to trust entirely to anything by which we have once been deceived. So one clear case, one thing that we obviously come to have knowledge through is through our perceptual system, through our senses, right? We see things, we feel things, we hear things, and that's generally, we think, oh, okay, I'm looking at a computer screen right now. I can hear my dog in the background, right? I know where he is. The senses allow us to, have access to the world, but haven't your senses ever deceived you? Like, have you ever, heard something that you thought was to the left of you, but it turned out that it was to the right of you? Have you ever seen something like in a quick flash and mistaken what it actually was? Have you ever felt something, as if something like brushed your back or something like that, and it wasn't there? Descartes recognizes that the senses sometimes do trick us in a way, and so all of the knowledge that we come to have by means of the senses is in one way or another doubtable. So it's an interesting question whether or not we can trust our senses once we know that they sometimes deceive us, right? Clearly, the deliverances of our perceptions can be doubted. The beliefs that we form on the basis of perceiving, we know we can doubt those things. So if we can doubt them, at the very least, it's unclear whether or not we can trust our senses completely. And if we can't trust our senses completely, then the beliefs that are formed on the basis of those senses are definitely not indubitable. So for Descartes, they're out. Now, usually you can trust your senses, but here's another way of thinking about why you shouldn't. So there's a fact for Descartes here that he's sitting by a fire, thinking in his dressing gown, thinking about what he can doubt, right? But how can he possibly deny that the hands in front of him are his? But think about this, right? And this brings us to what's called the dream argument. Descartes realizes that he's a man, he's a person that often sleeps, as we all are, right? And insofar as he sleeps, he often finds himself dreaming. And sometimes his dreams are, of absolutely insane, fantastic things that happen, right? Um, and sometimes, you know, he finds himself having less than fantastical dreams. Sometimes he finds himself having very mediocre, boring dreams. In fact, imagine that he has a dream of himself sitting in front of his fire, dressed in his gown, seated near the fire, looking at his hands, you know, believing that they're his, while in reality, he's actually in bed undressed, right? Not lying, not sitting by the fire, not dressed, not looking at his hands. Now, what's going on here, right? It seems that because of the possibility of an extremely vivid dream that Descartes could be having, he has no, and you know, and this is, we're imagining a situation in which he can't even tell that he's dreaming, right? It's that vivid of a dream. It's like, it's like having a waking dream but not being, like, you're aware in it but you're not aware that it is a dream. In this moment, it seems like the very possibility of this dream forces Descartes into recognizing that many of his very normal everyday beliefs about himself, like where he's sitting, what he's doing, whether or not he's dressed, they're doubtable, right? They're doubtable because it's possible that he's actually currently dreaming. And if it's possible that he's currently dreaming and those beliefs are doubtable, then they're out. They can't be foundational beliefs, foundations for knowledge, or anything whatsoever, right? So basically, all of the beliefs about what Descartes' doing are no longer available to him as things that he can't doubt. Now, that's all well and good, right? Like, you know, sometimes we come across things that we can't, like, that we can't doubt, that we're not certain of in some extreme way. But these, like, basic beliefs about, you know, where we are and what we're wearing and what we're doing, they're clearly not, you know, the kinds of beliefs that matter for science really at all, right? I mean, nobody, you know, no scientist cares what Descartes is wearing, in a sense. But Descartes thinks, like, yeah, but okay, so really though, what I'm thinking about is, like, what about these, like, more scientific or foundational things, right? Like, can I really doubt things that are even, you know, more basic, like that there is a color redness out there in the world, or like that 2 + 2 = 4, or, you know, that space and time exist, that, you know, time works in a way where there's, you know, 1 hour and then the next hour, 1 week and then the next week, 1 month and then the next month, as years go by. Space, you know, I'm located in a spatial area and I can move to the left or I can move to the right, and distance between one space and another is real, right? Can't I come to at least know that those really basic things about the world are true? Like, don't I know those things? And those things seem like they might be, you know, the kinds of things that really found science in some sense. Well, so yeah, the thought here is, like, even if we're dreaming, we must admit knowledge of things that are real, right? Like color, shapes, time, space. We know something about these things at least, right? Well, Descartes moves from this, right? He's thinking about, like, basic issues in physics and astronomy, geometry, arithmetic. He moves from this, and then he starts to contemplate the possibility of whether or not God would allow him to be deceived. And it goes sort of beyond that, right? The question is, for Descartes, could it be possible to be deceived every time you think something? So here, do this with me. If I add the number 6 to the number 4, what'd you get? 10, right? Well, imagine every time you added the number 6 to the number 4, you were being deceived somehow. Something was breaking in to your mind and causing you to believe that 6 plus 4 equals 10. But in reality, 6 plus 4 doesn't equal 10. You just have been deceived every single time you're thinking about it. Like, how do you know that you're not being deceived every single time you make the judgment that 6 plus 4 equals 10? How do you not know that every time you count the sides of a square, you get to 4, you're not being deceived, right? Is it possible for you to know that you're not being deceived in these scenarios? Well, Descartes he wants to say no. He pushes. So we've got the dream argument, but even the dream argument doesn't seem to get us that we don't know really basic things about the world. But what about the possibility of being deceived by some godlike being that doesn't have our best interest in mind, right? It doesn't take a godlike being that delights in our being wrong about what we're believing. So Descartes basically at this point imagines an evil genius that is deceitful in some way, and the possibility that he spends all of his energy trying to deceive us, right? And not just trying to deceive us about whether or not we're dreaming, like whether or not we're clothed or sitting or walking around or listening to a lecture. No, it's even worse. He's deceiving you about the nature of everything, about whether what left and right are, what up and down are, what colors are, right? Every time you see red, actually you're seeing blue. He's just flipping it in your head. You don't even have a head, right? You think you have a body, but he's deceiving you. You aren't even embodied. You have no hands or eyes or flesh or blood. All of your senses are actually deceived in some way, because really this deceitful God is spending all of his time trying to fool you. I love this quote in general. But some evil genius, not less powerful than deceitful, has employed his whole energies in deceiving me. I shall consider that the heavens, the earth, colors, figures, sound, and all other external things are not but the illusions and dreams of which this genius has availed himself in order to lay traps for my credulity. I shall consider myself as having no hands, no eyes, no flesh, no blood, nor any senses, yet falsely believing myself to possess all these things. I shall remain obstinately attached to the idea. And if by this means it is not in my power to arrive at the knowledge of any truth, I may at least do what is in my power, suspend my judgment, and with firm purpose avoid giving credence to any false thing or being imposed upon by this arch deceiver, however powerful and deceptive he may be. So at the very least, one thing Descartes realizes that he can do is, given the very possibility of this deceiver that could be fooling him about everything that he believes, he can take heart in the fact that he can continue to suspend judgment about these things, right? Because they are not indubitable. These are doubtable beliefs given the possibility of an evil deceiver. So Descartes will cast these judgments from his mind, and relegate them to not part of the foundations of science. Really, I mean, they're all these beliefs are going to be good, and Descartes kind of wants them back, right? He wants to get all of the regular beliefs that we have back, but later, right? What he's looking for is foundational beliefs to the pyramid of knowledge that we've got, right? And all of these other beliefs he thinks are going to be somewhere in the middle of the pyramid, but really what he's looking for are foundational beliefs that are undoubtable, that then can help us start to build back up to our everyday knowledge, right? So what's going on? What's going to happen next? Well, in the sort of story of the Meditations, Descartes, he spends this whole day like being really skeptical, and then he kind of goes to bed, and then he gets up the next day and starts writing the second meditation, right, where he comes to realize that he was so so in doubt the day before, so disconcerted with his being in doubt and his inability to find a foundation for all knowledge, his inability to find any single belief with which he could be entirely certain. Well, he's sort of in tatters, but this next day he does come to see something that he starts to think, oh, maybe at the very least I can find some indubitable beliefs. Now remember what he's able to do, and what he sort of takes solace in at the end of the first meditation, is his ability to suspend his own judgments about any of the beliefs that he has. So here's basically, I'll just read this because I think it's fun. I suppose then that all the things that I see are false. I persuade myself that nothing has ever existed of all that my fallacious memory represents to me. I consider that I possess no senses. I imagine that body, figure, extension, movement, and place are but the fictions of my mind. What then can be esteemed as true? Perhaps nothing at all, unless that there is nothing in the world that is certain. But how can I know that there is not something different from those things that I have just considered, of which one cannot have the slightest doubt? Is there not some God or some other being, by whatever name we call it, who puts these reflections into my mind? What is not necessary, for is it not possible that I am capable of producing them myself? I myself, am I not at least something? But I have already denied that I had senses and body, yet I hesitate for what follows from that. Am I so dependent on body and the senses that I cannot exist without these? But I was persuaded that there was nothing in all the world, that there was no heaven, no earth, that there were no minds, no bodies. Was I not then likewise persuaded that I did not exist? Not at all. Of a surety, I myself did exist, since I persuaded myself of something, or more, or merely because I thought of something. But there is some deceiver or other, very powerful and very cunning, who is ever employing his ingenuity in deceiving me. Then without doubt I exist also if he deceives me. And let him deceive me as much as he will. He can never cause me to be nothing, so long as I think that I am something. So that after having reflected well and carefully examined all things, we must come to the definite conclusion that this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true each time that I pronounce it, or that I mentally conceive it. Basically, what Descartes' done here is shown that even if he's attempting to give up all of his beliefs, to suspend judgment about all of his beliefs, to doubt everything that he believes because of the possibility of an evil God or a deceiver, it's impossible for him to come to believe that he doesn't exist. It's possible for him to come to believe that he doesn't have a body, or that he doesn't actually have senses that he can trust, or anything of the sort. But he can't come to believe that he doesn't exist. Why not? Well, because in order to believe that one doesn't exist, one has to be something that can believe. One has to do the thing that is involved in thinking, that is involved in doubting that one exists. And in order to doubt, one must exist. So it couldn't be possible that one could doubt that one didn't exist, because insofar as they're doubting, they must exist. This gets us to what, at the very least, Descartes thinks of as absolutely certain and indubitable, right? This belief is certain and cannot be doubted. It cannot be doubted because if one were to doubt it, one would basically fail at doubting it, right? If you doubt that you believe, or if you doubt that you exist, you have to exist in order to do the doubting. So it's not a very reasonable thing to doubt that you exist. All right. Here's another way, sort of another crack at his thinking about it. This goes a little bit beyond, and we'll talk more about this part here later in the course when we talk about theories of the philosophy of mind. What of thinking? I find here that thought is an attribute that belongs to me. It alone cannot be separated from me. I exist, that is certain. But how often? Just when I think, for it might possibly be the case that if I ceased entirely to think, that I should likewise cease altogether to exist. Basically, what Descartes is saying here is, at the very least, the one thing that he can't separate from his being, the one thing that he can't seem to, come to think, he can't come to think that he isn't, is a thinking thing, right? Insofar as he sees himself as a thinking thing, insofar as he thinks of himself as a thinking thing, he recognizes that he has to exist, and that thinking, at the very least, is undoubtedly part of what he is. There may be other things, there may be other parts to him, right? Even if the deceiver is deceiving him, if supposing maybe the deceiver doesn't deceive him about everything, maybe he does have a body, maybe he does have senses, right? But at the very least, those things he can be deceived about. One thing that he can't be deceived about, though, is that he is a thinking thing, and that he is thinking at this moment. All right. Well, I hope that you found that interesting and helpful for reading this. The rest of the meditation is really interesting. Feel free to read all of these meditations if you are interested. But the first and second meditations are the most important, especially the beginning of the second meditation, for understanding how Descartes responds to the problem of skepticism that he raises, at least initially, coming to have one foundational belief. And interestingly, I don't know, this is something that sometimes people bring up, is that it's not a very good foundational belief for science, right? But I think, therefore I am. Okay, well, great. Now I know that I exist, but how do I get from that to 2 + 2 = 4, or from that to, like the law of thermodynamics, or anything along those lines, right? The foundations of all knowledge, if they really are based on things as simple as I think, therefore I am, it doesn't look like we're going to get, if we have to build from that using only indubitable premises and conclusion to get to conclusions, it doesn't look like we're going to have a great time moving from this super basic claim higher on the ladder of knowledge. That is true, but Descartes tries to move from this to belief in God, and so this is one of the reasons in the end people think that Descartes did a great job at introducing skepticism, and then introducing one thing that really cannot be doubted. It is true that you can't doubt that you exist. I guess you can doubt that you exist, but insofar as you're doing it, you'd be being irrational, right? Because you're doing the thing that you're like, imagine doubting that you are doubting. Like, that would be absolutely absurd thing to try and do, because you'd be being so irrational. You'd be doubting that you were doing the thing that you're doing, and that's just crazy. All right, so I'll leave it at that. The next lecture we'll be talking a little bit more specifically about the structure of skepticism, and then later this week, I think we'll be talking about the structure of epistemology in general, moving on to next week. So hope you enjoyed that.